Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine this scenario, right? You're standing in your laundry room just folding clothes, and you catch that unmistakable kind of acrid scent of smoke.
Oh, yeah. Terrifying.
Right. So your immediate reaction is you check the dryer's lint trap, but it's completely clean. The appliance itself isn't like malfunctioning at all. But that burning smell is just getting stronger.
Because the fire isn't in the drum.
Exactly. It is
Uh-huh.
actively smoldering inside the walls of your house, where, believe it or not, a federally protected bird has essentially built a luxury apartment out of dry kindling.
It's such a jarring realization for a homeowner. I mean, most people look at a sparrow or a starling perched on their roof and just see, a harmless piece of the local scenery.
Right. Cute little birds.
Yeah, but the architectural interface between those birds and modern suburban housing is incredibly fraught.
It really is. And that's why we are doing a deep dive today into the surprisingly high-stakes world of bird control. We're looking specifically at Atascocita, Texas, and the operations of a highly specialized local company called the Critter Team.
Yeah, we have a huge stack of field data and architectural analysis to get through today.
We do. And our mission today is to really explore the severe property risks and the health hazards, honestly, of having sparrows, starlings, and grackles nesting in your exhaust vents and attics.
Plus, we need to dissect the really rigid federal laws protecting these animals. It's a minefield.
Oh, totally. And we'll get into the rigorous, almost military-level engineering it actually takes to keep them out. And look, even if you don't live anywhere near Texas, this deep dive is going to completely change how you look at the vents on the side of your house.
To understand the hazard, though, we first have to sort of understand the biological drive. Why are they there?
Right. Why my dryer vent?
Exactly. And the situation in Atascocita provides a perfect case study of what happens when natural habitats intersect with just rapid suburban expansion. Geographically, Atascocita borders the western shore of Lake Houston and the West Fork of the San Jacinto River.
Beautiful area.
Oh, it's a gorgeous, lush waterfront environment. But it supports an incredibly dense, year-round avian population.
Right. But nature obviously has a finite carrying capacity.
Yeah.
Like an area like the Jesse H. Jones Park nearby, it only has so many hollowed-out trees and dead snags for nesting.
Yeah, natural cavities fill up fast, and as the bird population thrives, those prime real estate spots get claimed.
So what happens to the rest of them?
Well, driven by that evolutionary imperative to reproduce, they don't just migrate away. They look outward at the human structures that are, encroaching on their territory.
Right. To a bird evaluating a nesting site,
Yeah.
your residential dryer vent is a major, major upgrade from a tree hollow.
Oh, it's a mansion. It's weatherproof. It's elevated away from ground predators, and it's literally pre-warmed.
Pre-warm. Wow. Which brings us to the structural vulnerability of the homes themselves, and I found this fascinating in the research. Different eras of home construction present completely different failure points.
Yeah, they really do. So if you look at an older development like Atascocita Shores built back in the 1970s,
Yeah.
you are dealing mainly with material degradation.
Makes sense. Wear and tear.
Exactly. The vent covers on those homes were often made of lightweight aluminum or these early plastics. And over decades of enduring the intense UV radiation of the Texas sun.
Ah, that sun is brutal.
It is. And you combine that with the constant thermal expansion and contraction from the heat and humidity, those materials warp.
So a vent that sat flush against the brick in, like, 1978 gradually curls at the edges.
Right, creating maybe a half-inch gap. And for a determined sparrow, a half-inch gap is basically an open door.
Now, I totally expected the older homes to have issues. The materials degrade. That makes physical sense. What completely blew my mind was looking at the brand new master-planned communities.
Oh, like Eagle Springs or Balmoral?
Yes, these are massive modern homes. You would assume they're built tight as a drum.
You would think so.
But the vulnerability there isn't degradation. It's an intentional design flaw based entirely on cost efficiency.
Yeah, the builder-grade materials.
Exactly. Builders use these cheap plastic flap vents on the exterior for bathroom exhausts and dryer ducts. And the mechanics of those flaps are designed strictly for outward airflow.
Right, the pressure of the dryer exhaust pushes the little unlatched plastic flap open, and then when the dryer stops, gravity just drops the flap down.
It's basically like putting a screen door on a submarine. It's totally ineffective for what it's actually facing.
That is a perfect analogy. From an engineering standpoint, that gravity drop design offers zero resistance against external intrusion. It assumes the only force ever acting on it will be wind.
But birds are smart.
Incredibly smart. They are remarkably adept at mechanical problem solving. Starlings, for example, have a highly specialized beak musculature.
Wait, really? Their beaks are different?
Yeah. Unlike most birds whose strongest muscles are used to clamp their beaks shut, starlings actually have incredibly strong muscles designed to pry things
Oh,
open.
wow. I had no idea.
It's an evolutionary trait for foraging in soil. So when a starling encounters a gravity-dropped plastic vent flap, it simply inserts its beak under the lip and just pries the flap backward.
That is crazy. It's essentially a reverse-engineered mechanism. It
Exactly.
reminds me of setting up a one-way security turnstile, only to have an intruder realize they can just reach over and unhook the hinge. The flap isn't broken, it's just easily outsmarted.
And sparrows, while they aren't as physically strong as starlings, they are notoriously persistent. They will exploit tiny little wind drafts that lift the flap just a fraction of an inch.
Then just force themselves in.
Yeah, wedging their bodies into the gap until they push all the way through. And once they are inside that smooth, protected ductwork, the real danger begins.
Because the physical intrusion is just the catalyst, right?
Mm-hmm.
The secondary effects are where the extreme property damage and life safety come into play.
Absolutely. Let's trace the mechanics of a dryer vent nest. A bird doesn't just lay eggs on the bare metal. It has to construct a nest.
Which means making hundreds of trips back and forth.
Hundreds. Dragging in dried grass, twigs, leaves, molted feathers, and they pack this material incredibly tightly into the duct.
And a standard residential dryer exhaust duct is usually what, about 4 inches in diameter?
Yep, just 4 inches.
It does not take much material to completely occlude that space. Once that plug of twigs and grass is established, it fundamentally breaks the thermodynamics of the appliance.
It ruins it. A dryer relies on the continuous exhaust of hot, moisture-laden air to function safely. If the exhaust is blocked by a dense bird nest, the hot air just backs up into the dryer cabinet.
And that hot air is carrying lint, like highly combustible cotton and synthetic fibers shed from your clothing.
Exactly. The lint gets trapped right against the avian nest, creating this compacted mass of dry vegetation and flammable fiber.
It sounds like a literal bomb.
It essentially is. As the airflow drops to zero, the internal temperature of the dryer spikes. The appliance works harder, the heating element runs way longer to try to dry the clothes, and eventually the trapped heat reaches the ignition point of that lint and twig mixture.
So that burning smell we talked about in the intro, that is often the final warning sign before a localized duct fire spreads into the actual framing of the house.
Yeah. The fire risk is profound because it's largely invisible until it is critical.
That's terrifying. But the sources point to another hazard that is entirely biological, and this happens when birds bypass the small vents and get into larger structural voids.
Right, like open soffits or getting directly into the attic space.
Like grackles.
Right, yes, grackles. They are larger, highly social birds, very common in Texas, and they are particularly notorious for congregating in wide architectural overhangs. And when birds roost in these enclosed or semi-enclosed spaces, they generate massive, massive amounts of droppings.
Okay, let's talk about the droppings.
Mm-hmm.
Because the accumulation of droppings in a dry, enclosed space like an attic introduces a severe airborne pathogen risk.
It's a huge health hazard. Bird droppings are extremely high in nitrogen, which provides a perfect substrate for a specific fungus.
Histoplasma capsulatum, right?
Yes. This fungus just thrives in the enriched environment created by the droppings. As the droppings dry out and turn to dust in the high heat of a Texas attic, the fungus produces microscopic spores.
Okay, so let me push back on this for a second on behalf of the listener. If I'm a homeowner, I hear scratching above my ceiling, I poke my head through the attic access hatch, and I see a pile of dry droppings.
Yeah. What's your first instinct?
My first instinct is to treat it like standard household dirt. I'm going to grab an extension cord and drag a heavy-duty shop vac up the ladder to clean it up.
Right. And we need to be crystal clear right now about why that specific action is incredibly dangerous.
Why? It's just a vacuum.
It comes down to the physics of standard filtration. The fungal spores responsible for histoplasmosis, which is the respiratory infection caused by inhaling that fungus, they are microscopic. They often measure just a few microns in diameter.
Oh.
Yeah, and a standard hardware store shop vac is designed to capture sawdust and large debris. Its filter is highly porous to maintain suction.
So when you vacuum up that dried, contaminated material, the motor violently churns the droppings.
Yes, aerosolizing millions of those microscopic fungal spores inside the canister.
So the visible dirt stays in the bucket, but the microscopic spores pass right through the standard paper filter and are blasted out the exhaust port of the vacuum at high velocity.
Precisely. You are effectively using the vacuum as an aerosol dispersal device. You take a localized biohazard and you completely weaponize it, suspending the spores in the air you are actively breathing in a poorly ventilated attic.
That is horrifying.
It is. Inhaling those spores leads to histoplasmosis, which can cause severe pneumonia-like symptoms and, in some cases, systemic infection. This is why professional mitigation requires such specialized knowledge.
What's fascinating here is when the critter team approaches bird droppings in an enclosed space, they do not treat it as pest control. They treat it as hazardous material removal.
Absolutely. They utilize the exact same containment standards, negative air pressure systems, and personal protective equipment for bird droppings as they do for bat guano.
And bat guano is notoriously hazardous.
Extremely. So, applying that identical standard to a sparrow nest in an attic really illustrates the severity of the unseen fungal threat.
Okay, so this brings us to a major inflection point for the homeowner. Once you realize your home is harboring a literal fire hazard or a biological threat, the instinct is immediate eradication. You want them gone today.
Of course you do.
But if you try to forcefully remove them or block them in yourself, you are stepping blindly into a legal minefield that dates back over a century.
Yeah, this is where the intersection of biology and law gets incredibly complex. You cannot legally treat all birds the same.
The legal framework dictates entirely different responses based on the evolutionary origin of the species, right?
Yes. Let's break down the divide between invasive and native birds. House sparrows and European starlings are non-native. They were introduced to North America and are officially considered invasive species.
So what does that mean legal?
Well, because they are non-native, they fall completely outside the protection of federal wildlife laws. In Texas, state guidance from the Parks and Wildlife Department explicitly states that the nests and eggs of sparrows and starlings are not protected.
Okay, so from a strict liability standpoint, a homeowner does not need a permit to trap or lethally control them.
Technically, no. However, it's a critical operational distinction that reputable companies, like the Critter team, still default to humane exclusion and deterrence rather than lethal control.
Right, because deterrence solves the structural flaw permanently. If you just kill the bird, another one moves in tomorrow.
Exactly, you have to fix the building. But the legal landscape completely inverts when you deal with native species.
Let's talk about the grackle.
Ah, the grackle.
They are loud, they travel in massive flocks, they can be a massive nuisance. But because they are native to North America, they are shielded by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918.
And the historical context of that act is vital. In the early 20th century, bird populations were just being decimated by the commercial plume trade for fashion and by unchecked hunting.
Right, for handsome things.
Yeah. So the 1918 Act was a sweeping federal law born out of a treaty with Great Britain acting on behalf of Canada to halt the slaughter. And it is an ironclad, strict liability law.
Meaning no exceptions.
None. It makes it a federal crime to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, or sell any migratory bird or any part, nest, or egg of any such bird without specific federal authorization.
Okay, so practically speaking, let's say a homeowner decides they're just tired of the grackles roosting in their soffit. They trap one, put it in a cage, drive it 10 miles out into the country, and release it unharmed.
They have just committed a federal crime.
Wow.
Yeah, the capture and relocate portions of the act are just as strict as the kill portion. If you have a nuisance grackle, lethal control is illegal. Relocation is illegal.
So what can you do?
The only legally permissible strategy is architectural exclusion, physically altering the building so they can't access it, and deploying deterrents that make the landing surfaces too uncomfortable to utilize. You have to force them to relocate themselves.
And that legal rigidness applies to chimneys as well, which introduces another fascinating species, the chimney swift.
Yes. As their name implies, they have adapted to use vertical masonry structures for nesting.
And they are also federally protected under that 1918 Act.
They are, and they have a very distinct, legally protected nesting cycle during the spring and summer.
So if a homeowner hears a ruckus in their chimney flue in the middle of June, they cannot just climb onto the roof and slap a piece of sheet metal over the top to quiet things down.
Absolutely not. If there's an active chimney swift nest inside, capping that flue traps the protected birds and their fledglings, which is a severe violation of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
You are legally required to wait out the entire nesting site.
You have to. You must leave the chimney open until the fledglings mature and the entire family migrates out naturally. Only after the flue is completely abandoned can you legally cap it.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. How on earth is an average person supposed to know if the bird in their chimney is an invasive starling or a federally protected swift. Down a dark, soot-stained tube, they just look like dark, fluttering shapes.
They really do. You cannot base a legal compliance decision on a visual guess down a dark chimney, which highlights why professional intervention is the mandatory first step.
Right.
Before any exclusion work begins, experts must conduct a biological audit of the structure. Technicians from the critter team, they don't just look, they listen.
They use acoustics.
Yeah, acoustic signatures. A chimney swift has a very specific, high-pitched, chattering vocalization that echoes up the flue. It's completely distinct from the harsh calls of a starling.
And they also analyze the flight patterns of the birds entering and exiting the property to confirm the species, right?
Sure.
Exactly, because the margin for error is zero. You verify the biology, you adhere to the federal law, and then, and only then, do you move to the engineering phase.
And given the persistence of the birds and the failure of builder-grade plastics, that engineering phase has to be incredibly robust.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the operational philosophy of the critter team.
Right.
The rigor we've been discussing isn't accidental. It's a direct reflection of the owner, Mike Garrett. He spent 20 years serving in the U.S. Army.
And he translated that military background directly into his business methodology.
His operating principle is, do it correctly once, not quickly twice.
I love that phrase. It perfectly encapsulates the shift from simple pest control to what we might call architectural fortification.
Base fortification, basically.
Yeah. A pest control mindset tries to solve the animal. A fortification mindset solves the building. And to do that correctly, Mike holds several specialized credentials.
He is a bird barrier certified installer.
Yes, and he is BAT standards certified by the National Wildlife Control Operators Association, NWCOA.
Let's break down what a bird barrier certification actually means in practice, because it really explains why standard DIY fixes fail so spectacularly.
They almost always fail.
Right. When a homeowner finds a gap under their eaves where birds are entering, the most common DIY instinct is to grab a can of expanding polyurethane foam from the hardware store and just inject it into the void.
It seems logical in the moment. The foam expands, fills the gap, and hardens. Problem solved, right?
But polyurethane foam is not designed for prolonged environmental exposure.
Not at all. When exposed to the intense ultraviolet radiation of the Texas sun, the chemical polymers in the foam begin to break down rapidly. It bakes, becomes brittle, and turns to dust within a single year.
And the birds simply peck right through the degraded foam and re-enter the structure.
Exactly. The other popular DIY method is stuffing steel wool into the gaps.
Oh, I've seen that. The thought process is that birds won't push their bodies against the sharp metal fibers.
Sure, but steel wool is highly susceptible to oxidation. In the high humidity of the Houston area, coupled with regular rainfall, the steel wool oxidizes and rusts out in a matter of months.
It just disintegrates.
It disintegrates, leaving the hole open again. And as a bonus, the oxidized runoff leaves massive permanent rust stains streaking down the exterior brick or siding of the home.
Those methods fail because they don't respect the environmental variables or the mechanical persistence of the birds.
Right. A bird barrier certified approach relies on commercial-grade materials designed for permanent exclusion.
So instead of plastic flaps on exhaust vents, they install heavy-gauge metal exclusion units.
Yes. And these units are calibrated to allow the exact volume of outward airflow required for a dryer or exhaust fan to function safely, while utilizing a rigid metal grid that a starling's beak cannot pry open and a sparrow cannot squeeze through.
And what about the chimneys?
The chimney flues receive custom-fabricated stainless steel caps. Stainless steel resists the oxidation that destroys DIY steel wool, and custom fitting ensures there are no settling gaps caused by the masonry shifting over time.
But securing the vents and chimneys only solves the intrusion problem. What about the grackles roosting in the wide-open exterior spaces, like the overhangs?
That requires species-specific deterrence. If birds are congregating on narrow architectural ledges, parapet walls, or the flat tops of exterior air conditioning units, the team installs commercial bird spikes.
And just to clarify, the physics of the spike system is simple but highly effective. It alters the angle of incidence.
Right, it doesn't impale the bird.
It just creates an uneven geometry that makes it physically impossible for the bird to balance and land comfortably.
The bird attempts to land, fails to find stable footing, and just moves on.
But for the massive open architectural voids like deep overhangs or recessed building bays, spikes aren't practical.
No, they'd look terrible and be ineffective. Instead, they deploy tensioned exclusion netting.
This involves anchoring a high tensile mesh across the entire opening, perfectly tensioned, so it doesn't sag.
Right, effectively locking the birds out of the architectural footprint entirely. And the execution of these systems is just as important as the materials.
You can't hand high-tensile netting and custom stainless caps to a rotating crew of day laborers and expect precision.
No. The Critter team uses exclusively in-house, trained technicians, no subcontractors.
That operational control allows them to offer written warranties. Because the technicians understand both the architectural installation and the biological behavior of the birds, they can truly guarantee the perimeter.
And if a bird manages to find a new vulnerability and breaches the system, the team returns to reinforce it.
It is a closed-loop system of accountability. And considering the severity of a dryer vent fire or a histoplasmosis exposure, having guaranteed professional mitigation isn't a luxury, it is a vital home safety requirement.
I couldn't agree more.
And I want to make sure we explicitly give out the exact contact protocols for anyone living in the Atascocita or Greater Lake Houston area who might be listening to this and suddenly smelling smoke or hearing chattering in their chimney.
Yes, very important.
You can visit the Critter team at their local office, that's 6942 FM 1960 Road East, Suite 211, in Humble, Texas 77346. But honestly, the most efficient route, especially if you suspect an active blockage, is to call them directly at 281-667-0171. They run their inspection services 24/7.
That 247 availability is crucial. As we discussed with the thermodynamics of a blocked vent, a potential fire hazard doesn't neatly align itself with standard business hours.
No, it doesn't. So what does this all mean? Let's synthesize what we've uncovered. We started with the premise of a minor suburban nuisance birds chirping in the yard.
But the reality is deeply mechanical and biological.
The geography of the Lake Houston area provides a massive bird population. When natural habitats fill up, birds pivot to our homes. The builder-grade plastic vents on modern houses are fundamentally flawed, acting as easily reverse-engineered doors for starlings and sparrows.
And the consequences of that intrusion are severe. A nest in a dryer vent destroys the exhaust thermodynamics, creating a highly combustible lint trap.
And roosting birds in an attic introduce high-nitrogen droppings that breed Histoplasma capsulatum, creating microscopic fungospores that a standard shop vac will aerosolize straight into your lungs.
Plus, you can't just remove the problem yourself because the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 strictly protects native species like grackles and chimney swifts, making lethal control or even trapping and relocation a federal crime.
Distinguishing between a legally protected native bird and an invasive species requires expert acoustic and visual identification.
Therefore, the only viable solution is military-grade architectural fortification.
Applying the structural integrity mindset of a 20-year Army veteran, using bird barrier certified techniques like commercial metal vents, custom stainless caps, and tension netting, ensures the home is permanently sealed against avian intrusion.
It is a massive, invisible war happening right under our roofline.
It really is. And again, if you are in the area and need that level of structural fortification, that number for the Critter team is 281-667-0171.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding all of these mechanical and biological factors leads to a fascinating broader implication. Right now, wildlife exclusion is a reactive industry.
Right? A homeowner discovers a flaw, and a specialized team comes in to sortify it.
But as our suburbs continue to rapidly expand, constantly pushing further into natural wildlife habitats, we are going to experience this friction continuously. It raises an important question.
Which is?
Will the way we construct our homes, from the fundamental design of the roof lines and soffits right down to the building codes, mandating the materials used for the humblest exhaust vents, eventually have to radically evolve from the ground up? Perhaps the ultimate solution isn't just better exclusion after the fact, but recognizing that we share the ecosystem with highly adaptable avian engineers and designing our architecture to peacefully coexist from day one.
That is exactly the kind of structural paradigm shift we love to uncover. If the birds have evolved to outsmart our current houses, maybe our houses are the things that need to evolve next. Something to think about the next time you hear a chirp from the roof.